Yes, page 211 on the left-hand side, Siv Gimel. Okay, so what did we left off? Left off was like this. The true villain of Hanukkah, not just occupation, not just religious persecution, not just assimilation, but even more we explained is the system, the divine system. The divine system is set up as such that when the Jewish people are worthy, a miracle happens. When they're not, God forbid, then God forbid, no miracle. And on Hanukkah, Hashem ignored that principle and said, even though the majority of the Jewish people are tmeim, are impure, are wicked, are wanton sinners, free sinners, nonetheless Hashem did a miracle for the minority, right? And that's what's alluded to in the description of Nial and Nisim. Description of the success, the miraculous success is described in 5 terms. You gave us the mighty in the hands of the weak, Greeks, Jews, mighty weak, many few, Greeks, Jews, and then it switches to Jews, Jews. Wicked in the hands of the righteous, Jews in the hands of Jews. Sinners in the hands of those who occupy Torah, Jews, Jews. Impure in the hands of pure, also Jew against Jew. And that too is miraculous, considering the fact that it was a minority of Jews that stayed loyal to Torah and Judaism. Most had either been forced into Greek life, but more importantly, more tragically, many have assimilated and adopted Greek life and were shoulder to shoulder with the Greek army. And yet, notwithstanding the great level of betrayal, Hashem does a miracle anyway. And that's the great miracle that's described in this description of etc. That's where we left off. Okay, now there was going to explain the following. Each of these things, many in the hands of the weak, many in the hands of the few, is written in Dover Veifuchai, each thing and its opposite. Mighty, opposite, weak. You deliver the mighty in the hands of the weak. Many, hands of few, opposites. Wicked, righteous, opposites. Pure, impure, opposites. Now, when it came to the last one, which was sinners in the hands of occupiers of Torah, we mentioned earlier that it seemed a little bit not directly opposite to each other, because the opposite of Torah learners is ignoramuses.
Right.
But yet we explained that oiske seresecha involved in your Torah doesn't say loim de seresecha, those who learn your Torah. We said it's oiske seresecha, those who occupy themselves in Torah, meaning those who live a Torah lifestyle. And the opposite of that is sinners.
And also,
Torah learner
can be a sinner.
Sorry?
Torah learner can be a sinner too.
Exactly, Torah learner can be a sinner. So oiske seresecha is more than just technical learning, and it's not limited to learning. It means you're involved in a Torah life. And the opposite of that is a free sinner. Okay, now what they're going to do is they're going to show us that these opposites are, these opposites, these 3 sets of opposites are specifically true if you're talking about Jew against Jew rather than Jew against non-Jew. If it's Jew against non-Jew, the opposites don't really fit. That's what they're about to tell us. Many in the hands of the few, that's a question of numbers, it could be Jew against non-Jew. Mighty weak is also a question of physical strength, it could be Jew against non-Jew. But the next 3, which are really spiritual descriptions, pure against impure, or the religious descriptions, it's more appropriate that they're described Jew against Jew than Jew against non-Jew. Okay, that's what we're about to learn right now. Yeah, we began with this and we start building, recapping to where we are now. So let's see.
Civil strife.
Sorry?
Civil strife.
Civil religious strife. Correct. Okay, let's see. Well, the is that based on the explanation we just gave on Gimel left-hand side, 211, that this description, you deliver the pure in the hands of the impure, the wicked in the hands of the righteous, and the sinners in the hands of those who occupy themselves in Torah. Is a reference to those Greekified Jews, the assimilated Jews. We can now explain why these 3 descriptions specifically are used. But in such a matter, as each thing and its opposite. Which is mentioned above in chapter excuse me. Excuse me. As mentioned above in section 1 of the talk, this essay, that each thing is mentioned in opposite as we just explained. To me, namely pure in hands of impure, opposites. Rishayim bi'atzadikim, wicked in hands of righteous, opposites. Zaydim, sinners, in the hands of those who are occupied in Torah, opposites. Why specifically? Why is it now better understood that we're talking about Jews? Because the opposites in these three things, is truly only applicable only with respect to Jewish people themselves, and not with respect to the relationship between the Jewish people and the nations of the world. If you want to juxtapose the nature of Jew versus non-Jew, you wouldn't say pure versus impure, and you wouldn't say righteous versus wicked, and you wouldn't say Torah observers versus sinners. These opposites are only or more truly applicable when you're talking about Jew against Jew. I mean to say,
Because even a Jew and a non-Jew is a double.
well, yes, but how would you describe that though? If you were to say, let's say, Ben Bris, the ain't a Ben Bris.
Right.
Someone of your covenant versus someone of not your covenant.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Right. Or I don't know. Ben Yisrael Amen. Ben Yisrael Amen, Yisrael Amen, or you what other descriptions you would describe?
Right.
Ben Bris, Ben Bris, or if you want to go Hasidus way, you would say, people who have an neshama versus those not, or something like that. Right. But pure versus impure.
Right.
Says there, but it doesn't apply properly to a Jew and versus non-Jew. Right. Explain why. Claim I mean to say, when you're talking about the relationship between the Jew and the nations of the world, bottom left paragraph of 211. Loy masim, it isn't appropriate, kol kach, at least not so much. The Torah almost describe the nations as Tamei and Rishayim Zaydim. When you're comparing non-Jews to Jews, to call them impure, wicked, and sinners isn't a correct description. When you want to describe them benigud, you want to describe them in contrast, Lebnei Yisrael, to the Jewish people, Shem Torah, that they are pure, righteous, and occupiers of Torah. So before we get to what everyone wants to say, and I think what I'm about to share with you comes out from what everyone wants to say, there's the following. Let's just say you want to juxtapose the difference between contrast a Jew versus a non-Jew. That difference is true even if the Jew is a sinner. Meaning, let's say you describe the Jewish people as members of your covenant versus not members of your covenant.
Just because you're a sinner, you're not a Jew?
Yeah, you still are. You're still a member of the covenant. In other words, if you want to describe Jews versus non-Jews, describing them as sinners versus not sinners is not the correct. Is not the correct.
Okay.
It's not a correct opposite, because you can have Jews who are sinners who are still not the same. In other words, if you want to describe the Jewish people as members of your covenant versus not members of your covenant,
You can't do that.
you can describe that even if a Jew is sinning. Because even a Jew is sinning is a member of your covenant. He's failing at your covenant, but he's still a member of your covenant. Right? So it doesn't really work. The same thing with right. So if or let's say a Jew is impure, he's not different than a non-Jew. He is. Right? So a Jew is wicked. He's still different than a non-Jew. So describing the Jewish people as righteous, pure, and Torah observers in contrast to non-Jews is not correct. Certainly, the Rebbe is going to tell us now that describing the non-Jew as impure, wicked, and sinners is not the correct opposite. Is not the correct juxtaposition to describe them in contrast to the Jew. Okay, clear? Let's explain. Kigeder taras the tzitkus the esek Torah, because the classification of purity, righteousness, and Torah observance, Eitzel b'nei Yisrael, when you're talking about a Jew, umisug acher lagamri, is of a whole other. It's a whole other type. It's a whole other classification. As it is, as it is by non-Jew. Let's say a non-Jew is a proper Torah observer. What would that look like? What would it look like? If a non-Jew is a Torah observer, what would it look like? He's following the 7 Noahide laws.
Yeah, there's a lot of people.
He's following the 7 Noahide laws, yeah?
Yeah.
Good non-Jew, what are you supposed to do? He believes in one God, no idol worship. Yeah, beautiful. But he completely eats crave. So the description of the Torah observer of the non-Jew is not the same description as the Torah observer of the Jew.
Right.
So to describe the non-Jew in opposition to the Jew as the Jew is a Torah observer and the non-Jew is not, it's not correct. Because the Jew Torah observers and the non-Jew Torah observers is not the same.
Right.
And the same thing with pure and impurity and righteousness and not righteousness.
Battling two fronts, once against the non-Jew.
No, so they're ever saying the point here is that when the Siddur describes the Jews or the Cheshbonoim as pure versus impure, it wouldn't be correct to apply that to the non-Jew because it's not the correct opposition. It's not the correct contrast.
There were two battles going.
Yes,
battle against the non-Jew.
and primarily
And that was a victory over that on the first mention of the.
the mighty and the mighty and the
other
many.
battle was the civil war between the assimilated versus the
Correct.
non-assimilated.
Correct.
So the two
Yes.
fronts happening simultaneously.
Correct. And now what we're trying to get to here is that fits more correctly into the wording of the text.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's continue. So the Ains of Begidram, they're not of the same classification. The non-Jews' purity, Torah observance, and righteousness is not of the same category of a Jew's purity, righteousness, and Torah observance. They're not of the same category. And therefore, and therefore, to describe them in contrast, the Jews in these categories wouldn't be correct because they aren't of the same classification. They're on different tracks. You want to describe the non-Jew in contrast to the Jew, to describe the non-Jew as impure, wicked, and a sinner is not the correct opposite. It's not the correct contrast to the Jew.
Right.
Take a shame. Just as it is, you cannot describe them as pure, righteous, and Torah observers in the same way that a Jew would be, because they're just in classification. If a non-Jew is righteous, it means he's doing the 7 Noahide laws. If he's involved in Torah, 7 Noahide laws. He's pure, 7 Noahide laws. But for a Jew, it's a whole other thing.
Like a different species.
It's a different. It's a different.
Can't have procreation.
It's a different classification. So to describe them in opposition, different. It's like
It was annoying.
comparing apples. Exactly. So and therefore, because their purity, righteousness, and Torah observance wouldn't be the same as a Jew, if they're failing to do their version of purity, their version of righteousness, and their version of Torah observance, that failure would not be in contrast to the Jew. It would be in contrast to other non-Jews who are not doing it, or are doing it incorrectly, or doing it correctly. Right? It wouldn't be in contrast to the Jew doing it correctly because they're not the same. Right? Like describing a kid who's failing at elementary as the opposition to the guy who's failing. This is not the right one, but a guy who's failing. Never mind. Okay. Okay.
They can't be measured on the same scale.
They're not measured on the same scale, exactly.
No, because
All right.
Yeah. We're all getting it correctly. Let's want to continue going forward. We're all getting it right. Yes. Okay. Get there. So beer is explanation. Top right at 212. Get there term of a title. The classification of purity and impurity. To main the which is the description here, the pure in the hands of the impure, the impure in the hands of the pure. Al-pi halacha, halachically speaking, to Yeshua's point a couple days ago. Shaykh rak b'Yisrael, halachic purity is only applicable to a Jew. Because halacha is a goy and a non-Jew doesn't make anything impure. He can touch a dead body as much as he wants. He's not going to make the next thing impure. Because the halachic classification of purity and impurity does not apply to them. And to quote the Rambam in the laws of Tumas Meis, the laws of impurity of contract with a dead body, quote, a non-Jew touches a corpse. It's as if he didn't touch anything. What can this be compared to? If an animal touches a dead body. So an animal, a dog touches a dead body and touches a person, the person doesn't become impure. Not because of the dead body. Same thing with non-Jew, because it doesn't apply. And not only with respect to impurity that's contracted by touching a dead body, in any impurity. At least biblically speaking, rabbinically speaking, there is certain impurities that apply to a non-Jew, but biblically speaking, it does not apply. An animal or a non-Jew does not become impure in any of these halachic impurities. Now that end quote from Rambam. Now comes Rebbe's commentary. The Rambam's intention being elaborate. Yeah, the Rambam's intention of being elaborate here. It's as if he didn't touch it. He's compared to an animal. That's his whole long description. He is. The Rambam wants you to understand the fact that a non-Jew doesn't contract impurity. It's not just that, oh, really he should be impure, but this law doesn't apply to him. Right? That could be one case. Like, for example, sorry?
Can you repeat the lesson?
Meaning it's not that they are within the realm of impurity, but that law doesn't apply to them.
So they cannot become impure.
That would be one way. In other words, like this. A keli.
In other words, you can't apply the law at all, period. Right?
Well, explain that. Let's say a keli, a vessel. Yeah, a vessel can contract impurity. In certain cases, it isn't. So you could say the same thing about the non-Jew. Humans can contract impurity. It just so happens this non-Jew doesn't. One way of understanding it. But they're saying, no, it's not the correct way of understanding it. The correct way is, they're not within the classification of purity at all. It's not like they are in, impurity applies to them, but it doesn't apply under these circumstances. No, it doesn't apply at all. As far as impurity is concerned, they aren't an entity that can contract impurity at all. In other words, it's like, you have certain things that are conductors of electricity. Actually, the best way to describe tumah and tara, purity and impurity halachically, is like a pathogen. Literally pathogens, bacteria. So certain bacteria transfer through contact of certain things, either through liquid or through food or through surfaces or through the air. There's different ways a virus can contract. The same way when it comes to impurities. Certain impurities transfer if you're in the same room, some by touching, some by eating, whatever, all the different things. Okay, so there are certain things that can conduct bacterias, but they just happen to not in certain circumstances. And then they're seeing things that just aren't conductors. They're just not within the realm of conducting impurities, of conducting pathogens at all. And the same thing is true of the non-Jew. It's not like really he could conduct impurity, just so happens to not. No, it's not within the realm of something that could get impurity. And that's what the Rambam has to elaborate by saying a non-Jew touches a corpse, doesn't conduct impurity. It's as if no one touched it at all, just like an animal would touch it. In other words, don't think that it's just like happens to be, it's not conducting impurity. No, the impurity doesn't apply here.
It's like if you don't have a certain amount of impurity, it's less than a certain amount. It doesn't.
The impurity doesn't exist.
Right, but
actually, over there, it's not.
In contrast, it's
actually, over there, it's not such a good.
Doesn't give out.
That would be actually a good contrast because chatzi shear in Torah could be something.
Right.
Like if something's a half measure.
So that's the other side.
That's the other side. Where if it's a half measure, it could become impure. It just happens to not conduct impurity right now.
That's not what we're talking about.
But with the non-Jew, it's nothing to do. It's not in the realm of purity and impurity. No, it's not like, oh, the non-Jew remains pure. That's not a correct statement.
It's like the other
purity and impurity doesn't apply. It's not like the non-Jew remains pure. Purity and impurity doesn't apply. It's not in that. It doesn't exist in that realm.
It'd be like outside those 7 liquids or 8 liquids that are.
Yeah, it's not in the realm of impurity. Yeah, and that's the kumepehemish and together as a cloud. And if it's just like an animal, which is not in the classification as well. Okay, so tomorrow we're going to see the same thing is true of righteousness, and the same thing is true of Torah observance, and then the Rabbi is going to conclude with encouragement for us Jewish people.
Wow.
Wonderful day. We're diving downstairs. It's a bliss.
Is it Rosh Chodesh today?
Yeah, it's Chodesh, yes.
What time is it?
The bris is right after their davening, yeah.